Hey, and welcome back to another episode of the Curious Cult Show, where we are talking to smart people about their crazy curiosities and why they start stuff. And today I'm sitting with Ory. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Uh, you're welcome and great to be here. Looking forward to
It
it.
has been, yeah, me too. It's been a very long time since you and I have spoken or seen each other in person. I can't even count, maybe nearly 10 years. Who can tell? So why don't we kick off with you telling my listeners and viewers who you are and why they should be listening to you?
Sure. Ory Okolloh. Currently, I guess in between jobs, sabbatical of sorts, taking some time off to figure out what I want to start next, which creates, I think, for this podcast. I am serving on a number of boards at the moment, including Stanbic Bank and the Omidyar Group Foundation and the Thomson Reuters Founders Trust. So spending a bit more time doing governance work. Previously, I headed up Omidyar Network and Luminate group work in Africa. I did that for about 7 years, early stage impact and impact investing. Before that, I was Google's first head of policy and strategy for sub-Saharan Africa. Before that, I was a co-founder of Ushahidi, a well-known crowdsourcing software platform, and Zalendo that's still running in Kenya now, kind of a Parliament Watch website that's now one of the, I think, premier Parliament Watch websites around the world, and definitely in Africa. And before that, I was a lawyer, so I'm a recovering lawyer now.
That's great. All these really cool, all these interesting things. And then before that, I was a lawyer.
Yeah,
Nice.
so
Yeah.
so quite an interesting background, and I'm a mom of three lovely girls, as well, aged 13, 11, and 8, all interesting ages, and living in Nairobi at the moment.
Amazing. The first observation is how many interesting people I know and speak to who were part of the Ushahidi founding team. It's like the little your Africa's version of the PayPal mafia.
Yeah, without the money, hopefully that's coming soon.
Yeah, let's hope. Yes, that would be amazing. Okay, well that's incredible. I mean, what a great career. So let's kick off with, can you remember the very first difficult thing that you started or set your mind to? What was it and what was that like?
So I'd say the most difficult thing was school, actually, a decision around which law school I wanted to attend. I always wanted to be a lawyer. When I was younger, I was very driven by social justice, human rights, and felt the law was a useful tool to address the issues that I cared about. But at the same time, I found myself in the US for school, and I knew going to an American law school was going to be very hard to come back and practice in Kenya, which I knew I wanted to come back at some point. And so figuring out what I could get into that both gave me a great education, but the freedom to do all the many things that I've ended up doing was hard. And I had lots of scholarships and offers from many other schools, but I turned them down. I had free rides basically to at least 10 other schools for law school in the US,
Wow.
which is huge. But I turned
Yeah.
them down to go to Harvard, which sounds like a not very hard decision. But I think at that point, when you're when you're thinking about the debt and how you're going to balance kind of your interest in social justice with a big debt, and but I think I chose the path of freedom. I knew that with a Harvard law degree, I'd be able to parlate into so many other things, and I wouldn't necessarily be boxed into one. So that was one, and I think following on that was then freeing myself to be anchored solely by the things that I care about and by my purpose. And what do I mean? Like that's my North Star. I think there's so many things that come at you, and so why don't you make a bit of money first? Why don't you, have a proper job first and build out your resume? And I think once and why don't you put off having kids for a bit and move up the ladder? who leaves a job at Google to do something else. I think freeing myself to really, really always focus on what I care about and what at that particular point in time was also, it looks very clever right now, but I think at the time when you make those decisions, that's really hard to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you remember, I mean, it sounds like part of that decision to go to Harvard was also there was some fear and fear of failure involved in that. Do you remember ever being held back by any feelings of failure or fear to doing something?
Oh, sure. All the time, actually. In fact, I remember the first day when I got there, I was like, this must be some big mistake. And like they're going to bust me at some point and realize they should have let me in. And we had like a mock class with Elizabeth Warren, now Senator Warren, and was kind of, she taught contract law at the time. And she was a terror, right? It was like all those books that you read and the movies, what else. And I mean, she would just eviscerate you, in class through the Socratic method. And I think just sitting there being like, please don't call on me, don't call on me.
That is great.
Everyone is going to discover that I'm dumb and I'm here by mistake. And so I think as you get older, there are all this, I think a fear, maybe it's called, either it's imposter syndrome or fear that people are going to realize that you don't really know as much as you think they do. And then I think also all my career moves have always, I mean, like I said, in retrospect, they seem really smart, but at the moment when I make the decision, all sorts of things could go wrong. Whether it was a decision to move back right after law school, which was not smart at the time, definitely. I had debt, I was broke, I was back in my mother's house because I knew I wanted to come back home. I come from another very privileged family, and so everyone was like, you went to Harvard Law School and you've come back to Kenya to do what exactly?
What are you doing?
Exactly. And then I had a great job lined up in DC at Covington and Burling. So that was one. And then another, I think, to then move to South Africa to be with my now husband, which also definitely all sorts of things could just go wrong. I had to start again professionally. I was moving for some guy I didn't, not really dated for so long. And so I think the underlying, if you can look at the thread there, is also my gut. Like definitely there have been lots of fear moments, fear of failure, fear of being wrong, fear of being broke, fear of screwing up the privilege that, I feel I have some level of privilege and everyone, be like, you've all the sacrifices have been made, and what are you doing again? Even with Ushahide, my mom would be like, this is a non-profit. Help me understand why.
Harvard Law takes non-profit.
Exactly. Like,
yeah.
What is going on? And so definitely lots of many moments of pain. It doesn't really stop no matter, how many times you make big decisions. But I think over time we realize, number one, that nobody really knows what they're doing, right? Like, I keep I keep waiting for 43 now, and I still feel like I kind of still, I'm not quite sure. And I think overcoming that, one, realizing that generally people, they might have some framework or mental models or whatever experience, but everyone is always consistently trying to figure out. So you get better, you're less fearful about making big decisions. And I think when I was thinking through this question, go back to when my kids were learning how to walk. And, I'm always so fascinated by that process because there's that hesitation, the fear of letting go. And then one day they let go and they're like, okay, I can do this. And then they keep falling and getting up and falling and getting up and falling and getting up until one day they're just running off. And so whenever I think about just that process, so when you let go and you say, look, the worst thing that you do is going to fall on your butt and then you're going to get up and try again, is how I try to overcome it. But it doesn't really, I think, go. It gets better, maybe easier, and in terms of taking the jumps when you realize actually you can recover. But I think that niggling feeling that what the hell am I doing when you're making big decisions never ever really goes away. And I think it's healthy to maintain some level of that.
Yeah, I agreed fully. I've started saying to
How
people
do you
when I
deal?
talk to them about, oh, it's yeah, it's so
You started
difficult.
so
I mean,
many
it's so
things. Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Yeah, like, and it never goes away. It's something that people mistake, right? And I think even with you and your career, they like you've been saying, they look back at your decisions and they seem smart, but at the time when you're making them, you know that they're crazy, you know that no one's going to understand, and you know that the chances are, the odds are you're going to fail. Like statistically, you are going to fail. Like that's how this works. When you started with Shahidi, when you start everything you do, the chances are, statistics tell you you will fail. And that's why for years I've said that I feel like entrepreneurs are slightly broken because we do that, in spite of the stats, we do these stupid things. Um, and it's funny, this theme of failure has come up more and more in the conversations I've had with people, so much so that I've done research and come around this concept called post-traumatic growth. And it's a psychological concept that has been studied in psychology for the last 20 or 30 years. And the theory is that no matter how bad the trauma you experience, humans improve after a trauma. They find a way to improve. And I've kind of internalized that as the way that I look at failure. Every failure is a way that I've learned to be better. And when you
Yep.
frame it that way, then I seek it out. I actually go towards it. And I mean, in people I've interviewed, it's been so interesting. The Starbucks founder, Electronic Arts, all these smart people, they never talk about failure. They talk about the lessons. And that's
Interesting.
such an interesting thing. And they don't see failure as this end point. It's always a through point that they had to get through. And I think you're saying the same thing, right? You do it, and then you're like, oh, I didn't die. Cool, let's move on.
Exactly, and then better for
Yeah,
it, as you said. Most of the time, you end up
exactly.
better, smarter, more resilient, etc. So definitely, I can vouch for that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like, and I don't know if you feel the same, but as I've gotten older, I've started to recognize the failures as lessons more. But when I was in my 20s, it was more of an ego damage. Now in my 30s, I'm like, hell yeah, that was amazing. I learned something. Let's move forward because my ego is lessened.
I think that's true, and also in your 20s, there's a lot of pressure, right? You're just trying to like check box and this and where am I at, and okay, and then you also think you know everything, and so any little thing you're like, it's very personal. You're like, what?
Yeah,
And then you realize, no, it's not personal. It's not, no one's out to get you. You just
it's
screwed
not
up,
about you.
or you just
100%.
or you just took too big of a risk, etc., and just move on, and you'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm quite curious about growing. You grew up in Nairobi, right?
Yes, I did.
So, I mean, I've traveled to Nairobi a lot and honestly, the friendliest people in the world. But I'm curious if that translates to how you were brought up. Did the people around you when you were younger tell you that you could do and be anything and they supported you regardless? Or what kind of an upbringing did you have?
Yes, so I was definitely very supported in different ways by my parents. My dad were two girls, and he was under pressure to keep going till he had a boy. It was very patriarchal society then, still is now.
Yeah.
And I remember him having conversations with my granddad. He's like, no, what? Why do I need a son? I mean, I have two girls here, and they can do anything that boys can do, if not, and better, probably. So there's definitely a very strong influence on him in terms of his pride in me. He was quite stubborn and always just never gave up and would push for things. And I think I've definitely inherited his that side of him. But I think most importantly, I was quite a precocious kid and grew up, like I said, not a very privileged environment. And I was this kid who, like, I read extremely early. I was reading newspapers yeah, like end to end. I would just read everywhere. I had any house I'd go to, I'd just find magazines, books, etc. Very independent thinker, and these two, they were young, they'd never just high school education. My mom didn't even finish high school, and they have this kid who's just like absorbing everything and is moving so quickly and is like independent. And I think to their credit, they just left me alone with that, right? Like, and I was quirky. I was like, I hated dresses. I wanted, to wear only certain kinds of clothes. I didn't want to look like a girl. I didn't want my hair done. Like I was never a girly girl, never, right? And so all of these things, you throw them in the environment that they were in, and you can imagine, like, okay, what do we do with this one? And then it's the first kid, right? So they have no even like sort of experience, whatever. And to their credit, they kind of, they left me alone, number one, to be nerdy and quirky. And then they figured out how to, I guess, nurture it in the best way that they could with the resources that they had. So I remember my mom going to auctions for expatriates leaving and just buying books, like whatever books, because they couldn't really afford to buy new books, etc. There weren't many bookstores, well-stocked bookstores. So I would just come home with a box of books, and I just would devour them, and then that developed sort of my range of things and interests, because you just read what was in there. You didn't really have a choice.
Wow.
My dad worked with an airline, and so he'd get free tickets, and we used them. And he made friends all over the world when he was working at the airport, and so we would go places with like no money, like basically just someone hosting us, but the ticket was free. And so I got to travel at a very young age. He put me on planes by myself, like from when I was 6.
Wow.
To go to like friends and relatives and stuff, because he could get the ticket. And so this figuring out, okay, she's kind of different. How do we nurture that, and how do we just leave her be? And then I think that the final thing that they did was, and all of these decisions were hard, you can imagine, at the time, and especially now as a parent, putting your kid on a plane. I mean, these were like no cell phone days, no nothing. Letting me just sort of do my own thing with minimal supervision. And I think finally they put me in a school they couldn't afford for my primary school, which was critical, because at that time the government schools were great. You just went to the school that you could walk to next door, and it was affordable, almost free actually. And they did the opposite. They put me in private school because I think they realized that I would not do well in public school, and they were right. But at the time I hated it, because I loved the school, but it was socially, I didn't fit in, right? Because now you're with the well-to-do kids, well-resourced. And I heard, the worst stationery, the cheapest like school bag, the cheapest like lunchbox. I was, always behind on school fees, like permanently for the whole time. And I kept saying, like, why don't they just put me in a school, like, especially as a kid, because there's then all that stigma that comes with that.
Did you verbalize that to them?
No, because, first they're African parents. I think I'd probably be not alive. Of course, I could see the sacrifice, right? So I wasn't like, I was thinking more of like this. I just want to help them. Like I can see this is a huge strain, right? And so, not being pissed off at them, but just like, I think there are easier things.
Yeah.
There's other ways we could
empathy,
do this. Yeah. So it was more from an empathy. So I think because I did see the sacrifice and the strain, and over time we realized that this is actually was so critical in the rest of my life. I never told them that until much later on as an adult. You just suck it up and you get on with it at the time.
Yeah, you'd be a teenager.
Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's funny how parents they think that they're doing the right thing by you, regardless of how you can respond to it and react to it. It's an interesting thing. I don't have kids. I never will have kids, but I do. I understand that like sacrifice, which is really interesting.
Yeah. So I'd say, short answer, I was definitely felt supported, felt encouraged, grew up in an environment, and then finally, obviously, teachers have been critical to me through my life, where I've been
Mm,
fortunate to come across people who see something in me that I don't see in myself. And I've learned to actively seek that out now, where someone says, "Why aren't you come first?" So it says, "Come, let's." I take that up. I've had teachers
mm,
who've said, you're special, you're different. I rarely come across students like you. I think you're underachieving in this area. I think you could do this,
mm.
and just pushing, right? You could be a leader. You just need to do one or two, three things. So I think I've also been extremely fortunate to come across people who've taken, and not mentors, though, just sometimes it's just one conversation that changes the
Yeah,
trajectory. And learning to seek that out, I think, normally as you grow, and when you're an undergrad, a professor tells you, come see me in my office, let's have lunch. You're like, I have other things I could be doing. But I learned very quickly that if someone calls you and says, let's
yes.
chat, I
Take
want to
that.
learn more,
Mm,
all the time, yeah.
mm. I'm quite interested. This is not one of the questions I sent you ahead of time, but I am quite interested in what you're saying in relation to how it's kind of molded your career, because I've had a similar people pull me and say things like that to me from a very young age, and it put a lot of pressure on me. But I come from a very privileged position of being a white male, so that is more expected. It's easier to go, oh yeah, of course, I'm amazing. I had Greek parents who thought the sun like shone when I woke up, like of course. What was it like going through those sorts of experiences as a black female from Kenya? Like that, how does that feel, and how does it shape your career trajectory and the pressure on you in these? I mean, you've worked at some of the biggest, best companies in the world. How do you fit this all in your head? It must be a lot of pressure.
It is a lot, right? There's definitely the sense that you feel, it's like when you're the only black person in the room, that want to represent well. Make sure that even if you're the only person, you're opening up the door for other people to come in. So there's a pressure, one of just doing your job well,
Mm.
two of representation. I think three, the angry black woman phenomenon, because there's things that will be happening, and I just be like, excuse me, that's wait, what? And especially in global companies where the perceptions of Africa, then are maybe not well informed, and so, pushing for the either inclusion of certain things or programs or funding. It's a constant battle. I don't think I've ever
Mm.
had a job where I just show up and I'm like, yeah, I'm here just to do my job, whatever. There's pressure always, in how do you frame things? How do you, again, and it's draining sometimes because you're then always pushing for,
Yeah.
more diversity for this. It's draining, I'd say. Sometimes I think then finding allies and learning took me probably longer than it should have. Managing up, I just feel that there are lots of different things that come at you from when you wake up in the morning. And I compare this, someone like you just wake up, like you said, and I'm Nick, I'm awesome. Hey, what's happening? So it's a lot.
Yes.
I'd love to have that freedom, right? Because I do feel
Yeah.
sometimes that you second guess yourself all the time. If there's a comment, you're like, was that a comment? Was that evaluation of my performance? Was there something underlying it, or did I just not do my job well? Was it that my manager
Yeah.
has issues? And I think it's tough. At the same time, I mean, you I'd like to think that because opportunities keep coming at me, I think I try and do what others have done, where people be like, oh, actually, why don't we have 2 or 3 other, 4 other Orys? So you stick it in there. You stick it out, basically, so that you don't want to give up too quick. But I'd say it's frustrating. I mean, I have quit managers, right? Because at some point, I'm just like, what the fuck?
Yes.
I don't know. I wish
It's so crazy,
yeah.
Ory.
So,
It's you have beautifully and simply verbalized the privilege that most white men don't ever understand. That I get to go and just do my job every day. I'm not fighting for a race. I'm not trying to leave a door open. I'm not trying to get more people like me in the door every single day. All I do is go to work and do my job. And that is the simplest form that I've heard of explaining this privilege that I have. So thank you. That was incredible.
yeah, and I hadn't even thought about. I mean, but I have to verbalize it when I say. I mean, I even when I look at, and it's not just white men; it's men actually. So white men is sort of level one.
The pinnacle of the douchebags. Yeah.
but men generally, and sometimes I've had to orient myself just by watching him, because he would go on business trips and he's gone. He's not like, how's the house doing? How's the kid? Has everyone eaten? I traveled with male colleagues a lot when I was at Google, and they're always like free.
They switch off. Yeah.
Yes, someone's taking care of shit at home. And at some point, people is asking, how do you juggle and this and the kids and whatever? I said, you know what? I switch off too. I have a partner. I'm trusting that, the kids will be fine. I've not left them in the bush somewhere. And
yeah.
And
but I mean, again, it's amazing. You even have to explain that. The fact that you have to explain, like, how do you balance it all? No one's ever asked me that, ever.
Yeah. I stopped answering that question at panels. I'd be like, unless you're asking the men sitting next to me, I'm not answering it. And at some point, I was like,
good for you.
With the profile that I have, the same, like, I'm more recognized as a big profile. I don't see any of the men with my profile being asked how they manage travel and work and whatever. And I'd say like silly things. I'd say, I'm glad you asked that question, because I left my kids out in the world. I left them on the street.
Oh, that's great.
I hope they're fine.
That is amazing. Okay, so let's move on. I have gathered from your story about your parents buying you random boxes of books that you are quite a curious person by nature.
I would say extremely curious. Intellectually.
How has that informed and dictated your trajectory? Like, curious people, in my experience, they are obsessive and rabbits. They're like squirrels all over. So how do you zone that in? How has it affected your life?
Oh, I'm still a rabbit all over. I think if you look at my resume, there's kind of a story that I tell, but it's a bullshit story, because honestly, it's and of course there is a theme. The theme is that I care tremendously about the continent and about Kenya, and trying to be in places where my work is either improving my country and the people who live in it, and I think creating opportunities so that more people are not dependent on luck, right? Like, I got lucky. If I look at my neighbors, the kids we grew up with, the kids I went to school with, my life could have been completely different. And then people I know who are smarter, more talented than I am, who just never got whatever. And so, the theme is trying to make it better for the next generation of African kids, that they, whether it's through tech or through investing or whatever, that people have more opportunities. There's a theme generally, and of course I care about leadership, politics, etc. That's the other thing. Everything else in between is all over the place, driven by just my intellectual curiosity. And so I get bored very easily. So, I mean, in all my jobs, I've had careers within a job, right? Like, because, so my title says one thing, but if you look at what I do within the organization, people will be like, "Why do you sleep?" I'm like, "No, it's fine. Just leave me alone."
Fun.
I can't do like one thing, right? So I've been, even with jobs,
Yeah.
I've been entrepreneurial within jobs, right? So that's the other way I scratch my itch. I say, okay, why are we doing this? And people fairly, the companies that are smart just realize, oh, we can get a lot of, we can get like 3 jobs.
Let her go. Let her go.
Yeah, we can do the jobs of 3 people if we just give us space.
Yeah.
I was definitely like that at Google. And so, I had the room to develop new projects, interesting things. But I'd say I've just come to make peace with it. I used to be very apologetic about the fact that I have, I'm all over. I balance it out now. And for people to free you means that you do your core job. It's not at the expense of that. I believe in excellence in terms of the work, excellence in terms of if I'm learning something new, once I learn it, I do it extremely well. And then balance that out with other interests. I think also I'm the kind of person, so let's say that with impact investing, how I got in there, people kept coming to me, "Hey, Ory, what's the latest in tech? Which startups should we be looking at? What are the trends?" etc. And they're all like white men flying in from the US and the UK coming to invest in Africa. And then pinging me, and they're getting paid. And I was like, wait a minute, first of all, like,
This is some bullshit.
Yeah, this is like pick your brain, like bullshit.
Yeah. Pick your brain. Oh, I hate that. I hate that so much.
I don't do that anymore. So I was like, how hard can it be? Like, I don't know anything about investing. I want to learn, and then I want to be the person who's actually doing the investments sitting in Africa. And that's exactly what I did. Right? So a lot of jobs or moves that I've made are really driven by like, either I want to fix this, and what's the platform that will allow me to do that? Or I want to learn something new. I've done, my 3-4 years, and I can do this now in my sleep. And I'm very miserable when I'm not like running at, 200 Ks an hour. Like I'm actually miserable. And so I've just made peace with that, I need to do many things at the same time. I figured out a way to do it without compromising on the quality of work. And I thrive on it. I thrive on learning. I thrive on just learning random shit. Like I'm that person, right? I say, oh, let me read an article, I don't know, on bats in whatever. Like it has nothing to do with anything.
What? I'm so glad you said that. I think it's Charlie Munger and Bill Gates who have said that their favorite letter exchange with one another was about the mating habits of naked moles. Now, isn't that incredible? 2 of the wealthiest people in the world's favorite conversations is about the mating habits of naked moles. So what is the most arbitrary thing you've put yourself through learning?
Oh, God. I'd say I haven't maybe deliberately sat down and said, okay, let me just go learn something new. But I do the Sunday reads on Twitter. I've done it now for 11 years, which is crazy. So I'm obsessed with consistency as well, right? So I try and find, like, when I used to blog, I'd blog every day. And just how you do it, or every 2 days. If I broke that, I felt then the quality of the blog. So Sunday reads, I've done it for 10 years, 11 years now. And I started, because it forces me, by the time I pick the 5, I've read about 30 to 40 articles in the week that are all over. And there's an art to how I curate and how I pick the 5, and only I know the secret sauce for that. So there has to be a mix of like random, interesting, whatever. So that, I think, has just, I don't get paid for it. It doesn't do anything really other than forces me to constantly up my game and pick stuff that even hardcore like readers and newsletter subscribers haven't come across. So I'd say maybe is the most arbitrary. It has nothing to do with anything other than it just forces me to read so widely, and I get a kick out of picking articles that I know people haven't found. And then it forces me to find like random newsletters, and through that I've learned like a lot of stuff, right? Some of it is neither here nor there, but a lot of it has actually improved me in terms of constantly picking up new things. I've gotten to meet interesting people. I've gotten opportunities actually, because someone's like, I just think you're really interesting and I want you on my board because of your Sunday reads. I want you to advisor because I love your intellectual curiosity, but it's so random. But I love it, and
I think it's so important, the randomness of it, because so for example, people often ask me what's the best business book I've ever read, and I actually refuse to give business book recommendations because there's so many out there. I find I get more value from reading fiction about the perspective on the world and the way that things could be, and especially futuristic sci-fi fiction about how the world might look in 1,000,000 years from now and how it shapes the way that I see world today. So yeah, I'm with you. That random curiosity is just so interesting. So when you were starting something or considering a big shift in your career, what is more important to you, the detail or the big picture?
I'm totally a big picture person.
Okay.
I always have in my mind like this is what the end should look like, and these are the things that need to be in place. Not very interested in the minutiae. If you tell, okay, so what's the theory of change? You know, what's the thesis? Whatever. I'm just like, oh God, you know. Look, let's just.
So then how do you work towards the detail though?
Oh my God. So I'd say, and maybe this sounds like I'm contradicting myself. I'm an execution like ninja, which is interesting. So once someone else has said, okay, put down on paper, these are all the different steps, and this is the process, and this is the approval, and this. Once that's done, like I get shit done. So I don't. So I'm not like a big picture, and then off to the
I know what you mean, yeah.
high altitude and looking over and saying, "Hey guys, how's it going?" No, in fact, too much in the ways in terms of execution. I'd say probably in terms of the processes and that stuff in between. So how do I get there? A great team. I know my weaknesses. I know my gaps. I know the areas. If I'm left to me, nothing will move. So learning how to get out of my own way, sometimes getting a better sense of where I'm weak, and asking for help, and then hiring folks who are much better than me and the things that I'm crap at, and just giving them the space that to work. So I think it's a lot of it is not just getting out of your own way once you know the areas that you're not really good at, and then figuring out how to best close those gaps with others.
I'm interested to look back at the Ushahidi founding team and think about that big picture, because you've got a lot of big picture people in that team who've got a lot of vision about the future, but a lot of people like you who are interested in the detail of executing. How did you guys kind of come together and work out your roles early on?
I don't think there was ever a formal like sit down and let's assign. Everyone just gravitated towards the things that they were really strong at. I was definitely more in the weeds. I remember early on, like I was manually just going through all the reports, doing all the approvals, working on all the partnerships, the conversations with us. So Eric will come and would kind of, here's the big visions, where I want to go. David was really good at the technical side and the tech and making those ideas come to life. But I was really in the weeds, and the great thing about that is that you got to just really understand the product better. What sucked, what actually, oh gosh, this icon doesn't make sense, because I was the UX person without any UX training, because I was always putting myself in the eye of the end user. So if I was submitting a report and this, this doesn't look, how would you see it from the other side if someone hasn't gotten back to you? So I was always pushing this, do SMS, let's send a confirmation message, because you want to at least acknowledge that you've submitted the report and it's not all just disappear there, so get back to people. Then I was like, oh, okay, there are also good things happening at the same time as Kenya is on fire. Why don't we start to highlight some of the good things that are happening? Because I've gone into the messages and, it's not all crisis. So can we also highlight the ways people are helping each other, which then led to another product. So I think being in all my roles, I always put myself on the other side, even as an investor, making sure my team, we always go back to people. If you're saying no, say no early. Where possible, give feedback. Once you've invested in them, sit with them and help them grow. And always putting yourself on the other side. I'm on the bank board now, and I'm using all the products, and I'm like, I don't want to be just those directors who are like so. And so I'm always like, oh, guys, why does the app do this? This doesn't make sense. This, and so that
they're like, lady, leave it alone. Leave it alone. Yeah. Please.
It works, doesn't it? And so in that way, I think I'm a detail, not in terms of like process, etc. But I think for thinking about who the product that you're either building or starting, or the work that you're doing, how is it impacting the end user? That I do tend to get into the details of that, because I think it's so quick. Others, what are you doing? Like if you if you don't care about your either the community that you're serving, or your customer, or your product end user, just go do some boring paper moving job,
big business bureaucratic stuff.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes. So interesting. So I'm curious about these concepts of success and failure when people start. So in my experience, most people don't start something because they're fearful of failure, and most people don't realize they've succeeded because they've never defined success. So I call these my success and failure triggers. So when I'm mentoring young founders, I ask them, what is your success trigger? What is your failure trigger? So my question to you is, when you start something new, do you very clearly define what success will look like? Whether that's in your personal life or business, do you have a clear idea, or you just work towards something?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't have like check boxes of saying, okay, this and this, and you get there. I'm less like, success for me is just get something out the door, and then we'll make it better over time. So, it's like shit or get off the pot, basically. So that's my success metric. Did I get off the pot, or did I, so it's that. Actually, let me not add more to that. It's just shit or get off the pot.
And what about the converse? What's your relationship with failure like, and how do you define it?
I think it's, and there are many things that have been great ideas that have died or have killed or whatever, that were great ideas in my mind, but clearly not in the minds of other people. If if you build something and it's not, there's just no use of it, or there's something that you thought was a problem, but you didn't spend enough time thinking about whether it was a problem for other people. So I think, and that becomes apparent fairly quickly. For me, that's a failure, that there was not enough time spent thinking about who else is this a problem for. I think increasingly, sometimes, when you're younger, maybe I find that now it's harder to get started, maybe, compared to, now I factor in so many things, a lot more. The list of family, kids, mortgage, university. Okay, I have another 10, 15 years where I want to work really hard. Is this really where I want to deploy that time? And so it's, I say, beyond sort of building things that are clearly useless to other people. The second is just the inertia where you overthink and you end up with something that is so cluttered. Then it gets harder to have those big visionary moments. And I think for me, when I sit back and I was like, "Ooh, okay, what was I trying to do with that?" I think those are failures. But I get similar to success. I don't necessarily have, maybe like you, kind of, when would I know this is bad or when to stop? I think generally the universe is pretty good about telling you, actually.
Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense. So I've developed this theory called the sacrifice fallacy. It's in a response to the idea of this hustle porn that young startup founders have, that they work 18 hours a day, they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't train, they just work. I've come up with a response that I call that the sacrifice fallacy, the belief that you have to sacrifice your physical and mental well-being to build anything. In relation to that statement, what do you think of the concept of work-life balance?
I think there is this, it's almost like a theater of, busyness, especially in America. And the way you have security theater in the airport, there's like totally super productive, I've done X number of things in a day, and I think having spent time going to school and living in the US, and it's a drug. You actually then, you feel like you constantly have to fill in your time and your slots, and I only have 10 minutes, make it quick. And dude, that is never that serious. So I think it was one of the benefits of moving back to the continent. Is I think my first year, everyone drove me crazy because I was like, guys, come on, chop this, where. And then you're like, what are we, there's enough hours in the day. 24 hours is a long time, and I read that it was an article when you break it up into 8-hour chunks, you're like, actually, you could do 8 hours and you still have another 16. And you could sleep, get some nice 7-hour, 8-hour, and you still have another 8 to do your workout and to, watch your shows on Netflix and to hang out with the kids and that I think has changed my perspective in how I thought a day, that I'm so busy. I've definitely worked and I've improved over time to get, but it is, society forces this, like, as you said, that fallacy that you just put in the hours. And, I only had 3 hours of sleep last night, and I'm so busy, I can't do this, I can't exercise, and whatever. And I found actually the more I was disciplined about carving out time, the more successful I was. And just saying, okay, when it's work, it's work. When it's home, it's home. When I sleep, get all the devices out of your bedroom. And it's definitely better, but it took a while. And I think, when you're young, maybe it's fine. You can get away with that kind of. And there's no obligations and there's no whatever. So I wouldn't discourage if you're younger, if you're like in your 20s, you have the energy, go for it. But over time, if you're carrying that on into your career and into your business, it's extremely unhealthy. And if you read about people who are extremely successful, they don't go crazy, like working all hours of the day.
They sleep 8 hours a night.
They do. Or they carve out time to, to do other things, whether it's read or, think about
exercise or
Yeah, or
whatever.
think about taking time off to think about what you need to do to get your business or your work to the next level.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a mistake that young founders make, is they work in their business and never on their business. They never give themselves the time to work on their businesses.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ory, my final question is, what do you wish someone had told you when you were just starting out your career?
Oh, that my work won't speak for itself.
Wow, please break that out. I'm so curious.
So I don't know if this is again a woman. I think it's definitely women are more inclined to this, where we have a very high inability to bullshit, right? And so we just think and stories, and we're all like, it's going to be so obvious that everyone sees I'm doing a really good job, right? And so we, yeah, and then you kind of just present your work. I've done the thing, and you're wondering, oh, why am I not getting recognized for it? Or
Wow.
why is someone else getting all the credit for it? Or, and, or why am I, dealing with so much aggro and doing really hard work? It's, I think, underestimating the need to own your narrative, to put your hand up and say, hey, guys, like I did it, and to even package your work when you've done it. Like, there are all these little things that go into it. I remember I was at Google, I was kind of moaning to one of my mentors, and I was like, oh, it's like, you don't manage. I say, people know that you're doing the hard work, but you don't communicate it well. You don't manage up. You don't spend time understanding the people who, what they, whoever is that you need to influence, like what that looks like. So it's this, just thinking that all I needed to do was just do the work.
Wow.
And I think someone gave me really good advice that I'll end with. Because again, I was like, no, but I don't believe in like whatever managing up, and that's not my style. And why should I have to? This sounds like too much BS. And it's okay. You can decide to throw a party, but just because you've thrown the party doesn't mean that that people are going to get onto the dance floor, right? Just because you've hosted the party.
Wow.
So, do you do you want a party where people are on the dance floor or not? And invest in time and figuring out how do you get people to the dance floor. I think it took me way too long to realize that. And it's just how the world works, is that you professionally or corporate or even in business, startups, whatever, you have to learn not how to influence people around what you want to get done, whether it's a promotion, whether it's just more responsibilities, etc. And it's not just putting your head down and doing the work is not enough. I found.
That's amazing.
I don't know. Have you had
amazing
that experience where you've? I guess I think for guys maybe it comes a bit easier. I guess like I remember doing a peer review and on a project for a colleague, male colleague. It's a project we both worked on, and my assessment of my contribution was like a paragraph, right? His was like 2 pages. And I was like, what in the hell is going on? And after that, Nick, I had to.
That's such a great illustration.
Yes, and guess who would likely get promoted in a scenario like that, right? Because I had undersold myself, underestimated things that I thought, doesn't everyone do this? No, not everyone does that. And after that, I had to like literally make little notes on everything. I might not use them, but I say I did this and I did that, and and it felt really.
You teach your muscle memory, right? Teaching your muscle memory to own the shit that you do. because it's not arrogance when you've actually done the
Exactly.
work. That's not
And you're not
arrogance.
faking it,
Yeah.
and you're not. But it just seems very
Yeah.
counterintuitive, both as a woman, maybe as an African, you're taught, humility and da da da, and just,
Whereas Americans are taught to be bolshy and loud and brazen and
yeah, and
aggressive,
just
and they're
own your
everywhere. And
narrative.
even South Africans are not like
Yeah,
that.
and just own
Yeah.
your narrative. And I think, especially for women, learning how to, you don't have to go full 100% just all over. But I think owning your narrative, documenting your work and your contribution, and even if you still get screwed over, I think, feel much better about what you've been able to contribute in that particular point in time. So that I learned like way too late. So if I had learned it about 10, 15
It's
years ago,
fantastic advice.
things would be different.
Ory, thank you so much for joining me. In closing, I want you to tell my listeners and viewers where they can find and follow you for more great insights.
On Twitter, Kenyan Pundit. LinkedIn, it's new to me, but I'm trying to figure out how to be a thought leader guru type maybe one day. No, but LinkedIn, I'm also spending a bit more time there, learning from others and also sharing insights that I come across that are useful.
Brilliant. Again, thank you so much for your time. I hugely appreciate it, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
And thank you. These were great questions. I really enjoyed myself talking to you, and looking forward to reading the book when it comes out.
Thank you, Ory.